Imagine this. You're a waitress in Manhattan, barely making rent. You've never known your father. Your mother died taking that secret to her grave, except for one cryptic clue. He has the same birthmark as you, a crescent moon on his left wrist. For 8 years, you've carried that mystery. Then one November night, you pour water for an elderly millionaire, and your hand trembles. He notices your wrist. His eyes go wide. He pulls back his sleeve, revealing the exact same mark. Your voice shakes as you say, "My father had this birthmark." And he whispers back, "I knew your mother. Her name was Helen." In that moment, 35 years of secrets shatter. A hidden pregnancy, a lost love, a daughter who never knew. This is the true story of how a tiny birthmark reunited a father and daughter who should have never been separated. Stay until the end. This will restore your faith in destiny. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The Secret Garden restaurant in Manhattan gleamed with candles and crystal when Richard Morrison, 72 years old, wine industry tycoon, entered for his weekly dinner. Widowed for 10 years, childless, with a multi-million-dollar empire but no one to leave it to, he always dined alone at his corner table. That November night, when young waitress Emma Parker approached to take his order, something impossible happened. As she poured the water, her hand trembled slightly, and Richard noticed a detail on her left wrist that froze his blood. A crescent moon-shaped birthmark, identical to the one he had in the same place, identical to the one he had seen only once in his life, 35 years earlier, on a woman he had loved and lost. Before he could speak, Emma looked at her wrist, then at his, and with a trembling voice said the words that would change everything. "Good evening, sir. Excuse me, but my father had exactly the same birthmark, in the exact same place." What they discovered in the following minutes would destroy and rebuild 2 lives, because that mark hid a secret that had crossed 3 decades. A secret that would answer questions Richard had stopped asking, and that Emma didn't even know she should ask. The Secret Garden was one of Manhattan's most elegant restaurants, hidden in the historic district near Trinity Church. With its old stone walls, wrought iron chandeliers, and white linen tablecloths, it attracted New York's elite and wealthy tourists. But its most loyal customer was Richard Morrison, who had dined there every Thursday night for 10 years, always at the same corner table overlooking the small interior garden. Richard was 72 years old but looked 60, tall, broad shoulders still straight, completely silver hair combed back, aristocratic features marked by time but still attractive. He always wore custom-made suits, silk shirts, gold cufflinks. He was the image of discreet wealth and self-made success. He had inherited a small winery from his father in Napa Valley and transformed it into an empire that exported wines worldwide. Forbes ranked him among the richest men in America, but all that wealth couldn't fill the emptiness he carried inside. His wife, Catherine, had died 10 years ago from cancer. They had no children despite years of trying. Richard had been left alone in his estate on the outskirts of Manhattan, surrounded by paintings, antique furniture, and silence. His solitary dinners at the Secret Garden had become his routine, a way to not eat alone in the house that was too big and too empty. Emma Parker was 26 years old and had worked as a waitress at the Secret Garden for 2 years. She was a girl from Queens, the neighboring borough where she lived in a tiny studio with rent that devoured half her salary. Tall, long brown hair always pulled back in a neat bun, green eyes, a kind smile that masked fatigue. She wore the restaurant's uniform, cream-colored jacket with white collar, black skirt to the knee, comfortable flat shoes. Emma hadn't always been a waitress. She had graduated in art history from Columbia University with good grades, dreaming of working in museums, galleries, conservation. But America had no place for her dreams. She had sent resumes everywhere, done interviews that led nowhere, accepted unpaid internships that ended without prospects. In the end, she had to accept reality. She had to survive. And surviving meant serving tables at a luxury restaurant where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. But Emma carried something with her from her entire life, a mystery. She had never known her father. Her mother, Helen, had died when she was 18, taking almost all the secrets about her birth to the grave. The only thing she had said in the last days before dying had been cryptic and painful. Your father was an important man, too important for me. I had to let you go, sweetheart. It was the hardest decision of my life. And then, looking at the birthmark on Emma's wrist, she had added with tears falling, "He has the same mark. If you ever find him, you'll recognize him." Emma had never understood what it meant. Her mother had died a few hours after that conversation, and Emma was left with more questions than answers. Who was her father? Why had he never looked for her? What did "I had to let you go" mean? And above all, what did the birthmark have to do with it? That mark had always been there on her left wrist, crescent moon-shaped, about 2 centimeter, light brown color. She had been told it was a congenital melanocytic nevus, completely harmless but distinctive. No one in her mother's family had a similar mark, so it must have come from the unknown father. That November night, Emma had been assigned to the section where Mr. Morrison sat. She knew him by sight, obviously. He had been coming every week for 2 years. He was polite, generous with tips. He always ordered the same thing: foie gras salad with apple, salt-crusted sea bass, a bottle of Albarino. He ate slowly, reading the New York Times, then had a coffee and left, always leaving a $50 tip. Emma approached his table with the menu and a pitcher of water. Richard looked up from the newspaper and smiled at her politely. It was a tired but kind smile, the smile of a man who had seen too much of life, but maintained his manners. Emma began pouring water into the glass. Perhaps it was the candlelight, perhaps the reflection of the iron chandeliers, but at that moment, Richard looked at Emma's wrist and froze completely. There, on the left wrist holding the pitcher, was a mark. A crescent moon, identical, absolutely identical to the one he had in the same place, now hidden under his shirt sleeve. Time seemed to stop. Richard felt his heart beat faster, a wave of emotion he hadn't felt in decades. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he lifted the left sleeve of his silk shirt, revealing his wrist. Emma noticed the movement, looked at Richard's wrist and saw the mark. Her hand began to tremble. The pitcher almost fell from her fingers. Her eyes widened. Her breath stopped. She looked at her wrist, then at his, then at hers again. Identical. Perfectly identical. The words came out of her mouth before she could think, trembling and charged with emotion she didn't understand. "Good evening, sir. Excuse me, but my father had exactly the same birthmark, in the exact same place." Richard looked at her with an intensity that almost made her step back. His voice when he spoke was hoarse, full of something that seemed like hope mixed with terror. "What's your name?" Emma Parker." Richard felt the world spin. Parker. Helen Parker. The name he hadn't spoken in 35 years. The name of the woman he had loved with total desperation for 6 wonderful months. The woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving him devastated. He could barely whisper, "Helen Parker was your mother." Emma almost dropped the pitcher. How could he know? How could he know her mother's name? With a voice that trembled more and more, she confirmed yes, her mother's name was Helen. Richard stood up so fast he almost knocked over the chair. He looked at Emma with eyes filling with tears. And Emma looked at him, seeing something impossible. The same eyebrows, the same eye shape, the same jawline. How had she not noticed before? Richard said something that made Emma's world collapse. He said he knew Helen. He had loved her 35 years ago with all his being, and then she had disappeared without a word. He had never seen her again. Never knew why. For all these years he had carried that pain and those unanswered questions. Emma felt her legs give way. She sat in the chair next to Richard's table, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She whispered that her mother had died 8 years ago, and before dying she had told her that her father was an important man who could never be part of her life. Richard looked at her and saw everything. He saw the chronology, 35 years. He saw the identical birthmark. He saw the features that were undeniably similar to his. He saw the devastating and wonderful truth that was being revealed. With a broken voice, he asked when she was born. Emma answered automatically, November 27th, 1998. Richard quickly did the math. 35.5 years. 9 months after Helen disappeared. Exactly 9 months. He sat down heavily, his legs no longer supporting him. He looked Emma in the eyes and said the words that would change both lives forever. "I think I'm your father." The restaurant continued its activities around them, but for Richard and Emma, the world had shrunk to that table, to those eyes looking at each other trying to understand if it was real. The manager noticed something was wrong. Emma was sitting at a customer's table, something forbidden. He approached concerned, but Richard firmly requested a private room immediately. The manager led them upstairs, closing the door behind them. They stood facing each other in charged silence. It was Richard who spoke first, saying he had to tell her everything about Helen, about them, about what had happened 35 years ago. They sat down, and Richard began. He had met Helen in 1988. He was 37 years old, already wealthy, already married to Catherine for 10 years. A marriage arranged by families without true love. Helen was 22 years old, working at an art gallery. He had met her at an exhibition. She was beautiful, intelligent, full of passion for art. They had fallen madly in love. For 6 months he had lived 2 lives, the public one with Catherine, the secret one with Helen. But Helen wanted him to leave his wife, to be together publicly. Richard postponed the decision because of business, reputation, complications. And then suddenly Helen had disappeared. She no longer responded, had left her job, moved without leaving contact. Richard had searched for her everywhere, but she had evaporated. For years he had tortured himself wondering why. It had never crossed his mind that she could be pregnant. Emma listened with tears. Her mother had never told her this version. She had only said that her father was an important man who couldn't be with them. Richard said that now, in retrospect, he could imagine why Helen had disappeared. When she discovered she was pregnant, she understood he would never leave his wife. She had decided to protect the child from scandal, not make her grow up as an illegitimate daughter, object of gossip. Emma told about her childhood in Queens. They had lived in a small but cozy apartment. Helen worked as a sales clerk, then in a bookstore. They didn't have much money, but they managed. Her mother had never talked about the father, deflecting questions with sad smiles. She had raised Emma alone with immense love, but sadness in her eyes that Emma now understood. Richard asked if they could do a DNA test to be sure. Emma understood, immediately suggesting they do it. Richard nodded but said he already knew it deep down. The mark was too specific, the chronology perfect, and when he looked at Emma, he saw himself. He saw Helen. Emma confessed she felt it too. Her whole life she had had a void, an unanswered question, and now she had her father in front of her. Richard asked hesitantly if he could hug her. Emma nodded. Richard took her in his arms and for the first time hugged his daughter. Emma broke down, crying openly for all the lost years, for the mother who died without revealing everything, for the father who finally held her tight. They stayed like that for long minutes. 2 strangers who were blood of the same blood, connected by a mark and a hidden love that had crossed decades to reveal itself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. The DNA test confirmed what both knew. Richard Morrison was Emma Parker's biological father. The percentage was 99.9%. There was no doubt. Richard immediately insisted that Emma stop working at the restaurant. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Not out of shame for her work, but because he wanted to give her opportunities she should have always had. When Emma protested, saying she didn't want his charity, Richard was firm. It wasn't charity. It was 35 years of child support he owed her. He opened a bank account in Emma's name with a sum that almost made her faint. He bought her an apartment in the Upper West Side. Not huge, but in a magnificent location, with a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. He told her she could do whatever she wanted. Go back to school, open an art gallery, travel, find herself without the pressure of survival. Emma was overwhelmed. For years she had fought for every dollar, had given up her dreams, had accepted a life of service to pay rent. And now suddenly she had financial security, opportunities, a father who wanted to make up for lost time. But it wasn't just about money. Richard wanted to truly know her. They started having dinner together several times a week, not at the restaurant, but at Richard's estate or at Emma's new apartment. They cooked together, talked for hours, filled in the gaps of 35 years. Richard discovered that Emma loved art like Helen, that she had a sharp but gentle sense of humor, that she was stubborn and proud, characteristics he recognized in himself, that she read voraciously, that she dreamed of curating exhibitions, that she had a natural talent for seeing beauty in things others ignored. Emma discovered that Richard wasn't just the cold tycoon she had imagined. He was kind, thoughtful, carried the weight of deep regrets. He told her about Catherine, his deceased wife, and how their marriage had been proper, but without passion. He told her how after Helen's disappearance he had tried to be a good husband, but a part of him had remained frozen in those 6 months of 1988. He told her about the loneliness of the last 10 years, how he had built an empire but had no one to share it with. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the terrace of Richard's estate, he asked if he could show her something. He took her to his private study, opened a safe hidden behind a painting, and took out a small box. Inside were photos of Helen, young, beautiful, smiling, in a New York plaza, on a boat, at a cafe. Richard had kept them for 35 years, unable to throw them away even after the marriage, even after Catherine's death. Emma looked at the photos with tears. It was the first time she saw her mother so young, so happy, so in love. In all the photos Emma had of her, Helen always seemed a bit sad, as if carrying an invisible weight. But in these photos she was radiant. Emma asked quietly if he had really loved her. Richard answered with a broken voice that he had loved her more than he had loved anyone in his life. She had been his great love, his deepest regret. If he had known about Emma, if Helen had told him, he would have left everything. But Helen hadn't given him that opportunity. She had chosen to protect them both from scandal and complications. Emma began to understand her mother's decision from a different perspective. Helen must have thought it was better for Emma to grow up without a father than to grow up as the illegitimate daughter of a powerful man, object of gossip, judgmental looks, a stain on an important family's reputation. It had been a decision made out of love, even though it had caused so much pain. 3 months after that fateful night at the restaurant, Richard and Emma had built a relationship neither had thought possible. They couldn't recover the lost years, but they could build a future together. Richard began introducing Emma to his world, not as a waitress or stranger, but as his daughter. He presented her to his business partners, board members, New York society he had known for decades. Some people were surprised, others skeptical, but faced with DNA results and undeniable resemblance, everyone had to accept reality. Richard changed his will. Emma would become his sole heir. The wine empire he had built, the estate on the outskirts, the properties, the investments, everything would go to her. His lawyers protested, saying he should be cautious, that he had only known Emma for months. But Richard was inflexible. She was his blood, his daughter, and deserved what should have been hers from the beginning. But more important than money and properties, Richard wanted to give Emma what she had lacked, a family. He introduced her to the few relatives he still had, distant cousins, old friends who had become brothers. He created a network of connections around Emma, giving her roots she had never had. Emma started working with a prestigious art gallery in Manhattan, not out of necessity but out of passion. She used her art history degree, finally putting years of study into practice. She began curating small exhibitions, working with emerging artists. She found joy in what she did for the first time in her adult life. One afternoon, Richard told her he wanted to show her something special. He took her to the basement of the estate, where he kept his most treasured things. There, carefully wrapped in protective canvas, was a painting. Richard unveiled it, and Emma was breathless. It was a portrait of Helen, painted by a New York artist Richard had commissioned in 1988. It showed her sitting in a garden with her hair down, a sweet smile, eyes full of life. She was beautiful and identical to how Emma remembered her, but younger, happier. Richard explained he had commissioned it as a gift for Helen, but when she disappeared, he never had the chance to give it to her. He had kept it hidden all these years, too painful to look at, but impossible to throw away. Now he wanted Emma to have it. a tangible piece of the mother she had lost. Emma cried, hugging the painting. It was like having her mother back, even if only in the form of a painting. Richard hugged her, saying Helen would be so proud of the woman Emma had become. 1 year after that night at the restaurant, Richard and Emma's lives were unrecognizable. Richard was no longer alone. Emma was no longer lost. They had built a family from the ashes of a secret that had crossed decades. But there was still an open wound. Emma still had unanswered questions about why her mother never told her the truth. Why carry that secret to the grave? Why not give Emma the chance to know her father while Helen was still alive? Richard suggested going to Helen's grave together. Emma hadn't gone in months, too confused by conflicting feelings. She accepted. Woodlawn Cemetery was quiet under the gray March sky. They walked among the graves to the simple one with the name Helen Parker, 1966-2016. Beloved Mother. Emma had chosen those words 8 years ago without knowing how incomplete they were. Richard knelt before the grave. Tears fell freely as he touched the cold headstone. He spoke to Helen as if she could hear him. He told her he had found their daughter, that Emma was wonderful, strong, talented, that he forgave her for not telling him, that he understood why. She had made that decision, that he had loved her then, loved her still, and that part of her lived in Emma. Emma watched her father cry over her mother's grave and felt something melt inside her. All the anger she had carried, all the resentments about the secrets and lies dissolved. Her mother had done what she thought best with the information and circumstances she had. She had protected Emma the way she knew how, even if it meant growing up without a father. Emma knelt next to Richard, put her hand on the headstone, and whispered that she had found Dad, that everything was okay now, that she could rest in peace, knowing her decision had ultimately led to something beautiful. Richard and Emma stayed there for a long time. Two people connected by a woman who had died carrying secrets, but who had given life to the love that now united them. 2 years after that night at the Secret Garden restaurant, Richard and Emma were at the estate preparing for a special event. Richard had organized a dinner to celebrate the opening of the first exhibition completely curated by Emma at a major Manhattan gallery. The exhibition was called Marks and Secrets, and explored how people carry visible and invisible marks that tell their stories. The centerpiece was the portrait of Helen that Richard had given her, now professionally restored and temporarily loaned for the exhibition. Next to it was a photo of Richard and Emma together, both with their wrists exposed, showing the identical birthmarks. During dinner, Richard stood to make a toast. He looked at all the guests, friends, colleagues, artists, critics. Then he looked at Emma sitting next to him, beautiful in an elegant dress, confident in a way she hadn't been 2 years before. He said he wanted to tell a story, the story of how a birthmark, something random and insignificant to most, had become the thread that united a family separated for 35 years. He told how he had lost the love of his life, without knowing she had left him the most precious gift. He told how he had spent decades alone, not knowing that somewhere in New York his daughter was growing up without knowing him. He said that if Emma hadn't worked at that restaurant that night, if she hadn't poured water revealing her wrist, if she hadn't had the courage to mention the birthmark, they might never have met. They might have remained strangers in the same city forever. He raised his glass to Emma, saying she was the pride of his life, that she had transformed his last years from solitary to full of meaning, that she was living proof that true love always leaves a mark, visible or invisible, that can cross time and space to find its way home. Emma stood, hugging Richard with tears. She said in front of everyone that her whole life she had felt incomplete, as if she was missing a piece, and now she had found that piece. She had a father who loved her, a connection to a mother she now understood better, and a future built on foundations she never thought she'd have. The guests applauded, but Richard and Emma were in their own world, a world where a crescent moon-shaped birthmark had done the impossible. It had revealed a secret that was meant to stay buried. It had united father and daughter. It had given meaning to losses and pains they had carried for decades. That night, as the party continued, Richard and Emma stood on the terrace looking at illuminated Manhattan. Richard held Emma's hand, both looking at the marks on their wrists that gleamed slightly in the lantern light. He said something Emma would never forget, that some marks are destined. They're not random. They're messages from the universe, connections waiting only to be discovered. Their mark had waited 35 years to reveal itself, but when it did, it changed everything. Emma agreed, saying she believed her mother had known somehow that someday the mark would unite them, that she had given Emma that same mark, not by chance, but as a map, a guide to find her father when the time was right. And perhaps, they both thought, looking at the stars over Manhattan, Helen was watching them from somewhere, happy that the secret she had carried to protect them all had finally transformed into something beautiful. A family. Not perfect, not traditional, but real. A family built on rediscovered love, forgiveness, and a small crescent moon-shaped mark that had crossed generations to speak a simple truth. Blood calls to blood, and love always finds its way home, like if you believe in the signs the universe sends us to guide us. Comment if you've also discovered a family secret that changed everything. Share this story to remember it's never too late to find what we thought was lost. Subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes the smallest details hide the biggest truths. Sometimes the secrets we carry to protect others become chains that prevent happiness. Sometimes a tiny detail, a mark, a word, can unveil truths that cross decades. And sometimes the people we think are lost forever are right there, just steps away, waiting only for the right moment to reveal the connection that was always there. Because blood doesn't lie, and true love, even when hidden, always finds a way to manifest itself.